There we go. I think we're live now. I'm just going to try and get everything started, get our stream linked in a few places so we can pull in a few people and have a greater discussion.
Yeah.
I would also like to preface this by saying that I pulled an Oreo out of my cookies today that had nothing inside of it, and I'm taking that as an omen that this is going to be our worst podcast ever. So for those of you out there that believe in such things, it might be better to just tune out now.
It's certainly a sign of things to come, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, so I think we've got a cool show today for the topics and stuff.
Yeah, we have a couple of things to talk about. So we're talking about early access in two different senses. One being like review copies and things like that are sent to outlets, content creators, before a game is released, and the other is like early access games in general, and kind of like what that means for you as a consumer, kind of what that ends up looking like. So I just need a few minutes here to just get things a little bit set up.
Oh, we got some people joining. That's good. We've got an audience at least, you know.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Hope you're all having a good Sunday. We're just getting things set up a little bit here, and then we're going to be diving into our topic for today, which, as I mentioned earlier, is early access, objectivity, and neutrality in the games industry, as well as early access games and its effects on consumers and the end product itself. So we'll just need a couple more minutes here while I get everything underway. In the meantime, gambling. Tell people that joke you know.
That joke? Yeah, I'm not a trained comedian, so you know we need to get a guest on who's a comedian to do the jokes, I think.
Nah, gambling's pretty funny.
Wow. And
listen to that smooth European accent. He could convince me of anything.
I know, right? Although, you know, I get discriminated against because I'm from Essex, so you know, it's everyone only knows like the classic Essex accent. It's like,
oh, are you from Essex?
Yeah.
Oh, I take it all back. You're the
know.
worst person I know.
I know.
I'm just kidding. I don't know anything about Essex.
Not many people do. It's I mean, you know, you're from Canada though, so I assume you probably get more discrimination for being, you know, Canadian.
What? What's wrong with being Canadian?
Nothing.
We're not
I'm just
allowed to do that here.
I'm just saying stereotypes, you know, like you know, too nice and stuff.
You know what the stereotype that bothers me the most is? The fact that everyone thinks that I'm a fucking American. Doesn't matter where I go. They're like, they hear that North American accent, that vowel, and they're like, "You're from America, aren't you?" No.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. How dare you? How? First of all, how dare you?
Yeah. It's, I mean, at least you're not, you know, like the classic Canadian with the A's, you know.
I could be.
You could be.
Do you want me to be? I can do that for you.
No, I think it'd be too much for my British self to handle.
Do I have a PS4, Jazdeep? I do. I do have a PS4.
I have a PS4
dad gave me one that he didn't want anymore. But I think we're good to go. So why don't we go ahead and get this started? Did you want to start with your half, or did you want to kind of lead into it with my big spiel?
I think considering we've got about 10 to 12 pages of notes for your half.
it really got away with me.
I'm not gonna lie, guys. This turned into like a dissertation, basically. He could submit this for a university degree, and I'm sure he'd at least get a 2-1. You know?
It really did get away from me and ended up being a much bigger topic than what I thought it was going to be initially, and I'm actually really excited to get into it. So there's a few things that I want to talk about before we even get into this. I'm going to preface this by saying that this is an opinion piece, and I want to do this because we do like talk about people by name, and I do have some interviews with a couple of casters from the Total War community, that being Legend of Total War and Indie Pride, and they have both kind of gone over what their like contributions to this are going to look like, and we like worked on that sort of together. So they're cool with being included in this, but since I am mentioning people by name, I am going to say that I am not a trained psychology professional, a gaming media insider, or an all-knowing supercomputer sitting at the primordial nexus of the internet, squatting on an endless tide of information flowing through the virtual cosmos. I'm just a dude who likes the sound of his own voice and had a couple of weeks worth of spare time to do research. My intention isn't to attack anybody's credibility, but to present research that I've done fairly, I think, with reference to a few concepts from cognitive science. Please don't sue us.
Please don't.
Anyway, so we should start this conversation by, I think, establishing a few working definitions, just so that everybody's on the same page. It's not to talk down or whatever. First is, rather predictably, what exactly a conflict of interest is. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a conflict of interest as a conflict between the private interests and the official responsibilities of a person in a position of trust. The underlying assumption here being that, on average, most individuals are more likely to choose their personal interests over their professional and moral duties. Second is pretty simple. It's called metacognition. Simply put, metacognition is our capacity to monitor, identify, and adjust our cognitive processes. Your thoughts about your thoughts, if you like. And the next thing, and this one's really important, so keep these in mind as we go through this conversation, because like Gambling said, it's really long, and there's a lot that's going to get thrown at you. But the next thing is called motivated reasoning, and it's similar to confirmation bias, where evidence that confirms established beliefs are sought after or given more credibility than evidence that disconfirms a belief. It stands in contrast to critical thinking, where beliefs are approached in a skeptical and unbiased fashion. Great. So that's out of the way. Let's talk about review scores, because that's going to come up a lot here. But actually, hold on. Before we get into that, I think we should talk a little bit about whether or not review scores are actually important to anybody. Like, does anyone actually care about them? Because like that's the crux of an argument that gets leveled at a lot of gaming media, right? Or content creators, that they're on the dole from publishers, and that there's fundamentally an exchange of services, right? You give me a good review, which boosts my sales. I give you swag, special treatment, money, and ensure early access, which shores up your livelihood in the future. But does anybody actually care?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, it just reminds me of, I can't remember, it was like one of these hard platform games in that cartoony style. I can't remember what it was called for the life of me. But the journalist was playing this tutorial and he took like an hour or whatever to get through the tutorial because he was just not very good at playing games, you know. But he still gave it like a pretty good score, I think. And it's like, you know, I think the main problem comes with a lot of these official reviews don't even come from gamers or people who, you know, and a lot of reviews have been plagiarized in the past by some IGN people and stuff.
Oh man,
like
I forgot about that.
And it's like these people are journalists first and gamers second. So, you know, that's why for a lot of people that I think these reviews don't mean a whole lot, you know. And you'll go, this is films and games, you'll go on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, and sure, you know, it's not amazing, but it's interesting to see the difference between the audience score and the critic score.
For sure.
They're always completely different, like, and 90% of the time.
I do have a really interesting tidbit from a lady called Alana Pierce, which we're gonna get into. But for now, there's a lot here, so I'm gonna try and go through it as quickly as I possibly can. We're going to jump into our TARDIS, and we're going to take a trip back to 2010. And if you don't have a TARDIS, just run really fast backwards until you fall through a slip in the space-time continuum. So we're going to go back to 2010. Fallout New Vegas has been released to much fanfare. It's got a solid Metacritic score of 84 for PC and Xbox, and 82 for its PS3 release. I don't really know why the discrepancy came in there, but it's probably just a matter of opinion amongst the people who reviewed it for PS3. In any case, unfortunately for Obsidian, it was a very bad year for them, and they were just a few points short of receiving a bonus from the publisher Bethesda, which would have netted them like millions of dollars, basically, which would have been 85. So they got 84, and then the people who worked hard on this game, which was a success, by the way. Fallout New Vegas, I think, sold about 5 million copies in its first year, which totaled to about $300 million of revenue. So that's a lot of money. That is a success by any metric. And so they're denied the ability, or they're denied a bonus because they were just one point short on that Metacritic rating. But let's go back a little bit further. And this is an old one. I think if we have any older gamers out there, they're definitely going to recognize this guy. So Jeff Gerstmann used to be a GameStop reviewer. After this incident, he went on to found his own little publication called Giant Bomb. But he was canned from GameStop after he gave Kane and Lynch Dead Men a 6 out of 10 review, which is obviously an issue. Gerstmann would later describe his departure as part of publisher pushback in a streamed interview. And I've got all my sources in here in chronological order. They're going to be down in the description of this video. So if you guys want to follow along and like kind of fact check as we go through, I encourage you to do so. But yeah, I think he did this interview like 2 or so years later. And this came on the heels of GameSpot tussling with Sony over Sony pulling ads from GameSpot because one of their editorial staff had given Rachet and Clank Tools of Destruction a score of 7.5 out of 10. So let's go forward. 2008. The editor-in-chief, Dan Su, of the gaming publication Electronic Gaming Monthly, asserted that Ubisoft had barred EGM from future early release titles after the publisher took issue with EGM's review of Assassin's Creed 2, which Assassin's Creed 2 was a good game, still a success. Keep that in mind. Su also revealed that EGM had been similarly blacklisted by Midway, which is the Mortal Kombat developer, and the Sony sports department. The result was a loss in early access and ad revenue. So let's go forward. This is like really far back in time, 2008 was a million years ago. 2013, the then editor of IGN, Colin Moriarty, who has his own channel, it's called Colin's Last Stand, and I actually do source it as one of the sources for this podcast. He was blacklisted. And IGN is one of the biggest gaming publications in the world. Keep that in mind. He was blacklisted by Konami from a closed-door session of Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. They refused him entrance, or not just to him, but to anybody on the IGN US team, because they believed that the reviewers had treated the previous title, Lords of Shadow, unfairly. Again, this title was given a 7.5 out of 10. This is the last one, I swear, because you can probably all see where this is going. 2012. Game journalist Rich Stanton, who I believe currently works at Kotaku, blows the lid on the review publication Edge, changing a critic's score of GTA 4 from a 9 to a 10. And that was under pressure from the publisher to do so. Okay, I lied. Forgive me. There's another example that comes to mind that I'm sure is burning in the minds of many, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this. The Last of Us 2 has been causing quite a stir up to its release, and I think people are still a little bit mixed on how they feel about it. Player reviews and critic reviews are very divided in this regard. But there had been review embargoes of the second half of the game, and Sony was issuing DMC notices as they tried to get a handle on the situation. It was the pre-release situation for Last of Us 2 was a total train wreck, and there's this big controversy that swirled around their game following this. So anybody that talked about the leaks or about the second half of the game, Sony would hit you with a DMC takedown notice faster than you could spit. And even if you weren't talking about it, there is an instance of someone posting a meme on their channel about Last of Us 2, and then that video got hit with the DMC takedown notice. So what that does to a YouTube channel is you can have 3 of them within a certain amount of time, and if you hit 3 of them, your channel goes away. YouTube deletes your ass. So, and you can get 3 of these in rapid succession too. If someone goes back and they want to destroy you at any point in time, they just DMC takedown, up to 3 of your videos, and boom, you're gone. So it can quite literally end people's careers when they do this. So I think the takeaway here, and the point I'm trying to make, is that companies obviously care about review scores and the content of reviews. They care enough to deny developers bonuses and the fruits of their success because they didn't get sufficiently beefy Metacritic scores. And they care enough to blacklist major publications because they didn't give their games the review they felt that they deserved. And there's definitely some back alley shit that goes on behind the scenes in order for publishers to exert pressure on news outlets to help give them the positive coverage they desire. And there's some more examples as well below, which I didn't want to talk about because, like I said, this is already incredibly long. So I recommend going down and checking out the description, and you can kind of look at things in your own time and make up your own mind. So that's publishers. What about players? Let's talk about whether or not reviews have any actual demonstrable impact on sales. So EEDAR. EEDAR is a research entity that compiles reports on data and metadata in the gaming industry. And they did a study in 2010, and it was a pretty simple study. It's actually really funny. So basically what they did is at the end of a play session for Plants and Zombies, everyone who was involved was offered a choice. You could have $10 right there, or you could have a copy of the game. I don't know if it was more than $10, but I think it probably wasn't. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a choice. So 20% of the players told, or 20% more of those players told, that Plants vs. Zombies had reviewed well, chose the game over, flat $10 in their pocket. And all told, were more than twice as likely to pick the game over the money. So 2008, going back in time again, the DICE Summit, Activision president or vice president of marketing, I don't know if Robin Kaminsky is still the vice president of marketing, but they were in 2008, went so far as to suggest that for every 5 points over an 80% average review score, sales may as much as double. So obviously people pay attention to this kind of stuff. The other side of this, Ars Technica did an article in 2014, I believe, that showed that Metacritic scores really only sporadically translate into sales. So first-person shooter called Orion Dino Horde has a Metacritic of 36, and it still does, because Metacritic, I don't think, changes their scores after the initial release. And it still managed to sell a respectable 314,000 units on Steam, despite that. So it's not necessarily cut and dry, right? Going back to The Last of Us 2, controversy didn't stop it from pre-ordering well, which was crazy. You'd think that like people hated this and, it's just going to be a complete flop. And there was like leaks and people were pissed. It didn't stop people from pre-ordering. And this is the one that really grinds my gears because I was very emotionally invested in this. So take this as you will. Star Wars Battlefront 2, when that came out, there was a huge controversy about microtransactions. And I actually canceled my pre-order copy of the game because I was just done. I didn't want to deal with it. I own it now after they've removed a lot of this crap from the game.
You goddamn sellout.
I know. I'm a piece of garbage. I bought it like a year and a half after the fact when it was on sale, but I canceled my pre-order for sure. And it sold 9 million copies in its first 3 months. So Fallout New Vegas was a success, and this nearly doubled that, despite the controversy. So I think that we're really to blame as well, as much as we've seen some shady stuff from gaming publishers. And that's, I don't mean to suggest that's the norm, but these are some like salient examples. This is our fault too. Like we're definitely to blame, especially you, Chris. I hope there is someone named Chris listening to this and they're just like, what I do?
It's all your fault, Chris.
But I think the jury seems to be out insofar as players are concerned. I think it's clear. It's not necessarily clear whether they directly translate into sales, but I think there are some good examples there that kind of push me towards the latter camp and believing that it doesn't necessarily translate always into sales, but I do believe that publishers pay attention to them. So not sure if it's a huge deal for players, and a lot of people will say that it's not. But I think that it is a big deal for publishers. Mm. So let's talk a little bit about like people's personal experiences. And I'm going to talk about the video first that like inspired me to even touch the subject in the first place. I just came across it randomly. I really liked it. I thought it was thought provoking. And so now you're here. You're stuck with us. So a YouTuber many of you may have heard of, his name is Ranton. Really interesting guy. He's done some like really interesting things with his life. He used to like train in a temple in China with Shaolin monks, and now he does game reviews, and he's just really funny and a charismatic guy. Last month, it was the 31st of... No, this would have been... Was it March or May? I don't know. It was one of those two, but it's recently. It's in the last like 4 or 5 months. Released a video called YouTube Reviewers Are Corrupt. So I'll summarize his points, but I recommend watching the video in your spare time because it's a real hardline, spicy take. But anyway, here are the basics. So first is early access. Since it's funded from a marketing budget and given out with the intention to drive interest in a product, it makes the content creator part of the marketing campaign for that product. And therefore, anything that has to do with early access that you get directly from a publisher for free is sponsored content. And that's his opinion. Even if you try to remain objective after getting sponsored content, the fact that you are potentially even trying harder to be objective is already an inherent conflict of interest having an effect on you. And this is metacognition at play here. So you're thinking and you're monitoring stuff, and maybe that causes you to overcorrect. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And this is why blacklisting happens, because obviously companies care about this kind of thing. So he asked the question, why do people get blacklisted? Why do companies cut off access to certain people? If the benefits providing you with a review copy are outweighed by your perceived negative effect, they'll cut you out of the marketing campaign. That's a direct quote from him. He's also in the camp that low review scores do have an impact on sales. And he also wants to make it clear that publishers don't directly pay outlets or creators for reviews. The pressure exerted is far more indirect. So no early access, no being flown to events, no special treatment, that Rockstar thing that we've heard about or seen. And while he doesn't explicitly cite any research to support the conclusion here, this is just a conversation that he had with a bunch of people in his Discord. So it's just an opinion piece. It is at least supported a little bit by a research model he used to study bias control called the set reset model. So basically, when provided with the time necessary to think critically, individuals can question whether or not their reactions are attributed to the context that they take place in, i.e., if you get something from a reviewer, you're thinking about, your credibility and that sort of thing, and maybe you're going to over adjust. But anyway, rather than the target stimulus itself. So you're going to be thinking more about the context that you're doing this review in rather than necessarily the game itself. And you're going to be evaluating that process, so metacognition. This can lead to overcorrections. Judgments of the targets are even less like the context than if the context were present. Metacognition is the heart of this process of evaluation and adjustment. This at least is consistent with Ranton's argument. Just one sec. Oh my goodness, I didn't turn off my microphone. I'm so sorry you had to hear that.
It sounded like you sniffed a line of Coke there.
No, I have allergies and I'm really stuffed up.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
I didn't tap the top of the microphone.
Yeah,
that's fine. Embarrassing. Anyway, I'll survive. This is at least consistent with Ranton's argument to the extent that these overcorrections occur and can impact reviewer opinions is not exactly clear. I'm not here to speculate on that because I honestly don't have the qualifications to do so, and I've been very clear about that. So I don't want to speculate about the extent to which this is a thing. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this. I only want to say that there is research that supports the position, so the possibility exists that this subtle process does play some part in the evaluation in one direction or the other, and I think it bears some consideration. That sounds pretty damning, right? We've heard all this stuff. Oh, game reviewers are just corrupt. They're on the dole, et cetera, et cetera. But there is another side of this, and this is what I mentioned earlier. Alana Pierce is a YouTuber and a game critic who previously worked at IGN and has worked in the game industry for nearly a decade. Less than 2 weeks ago, she posted a video discussing her experiences inside the industry working at a major gaming publication, that being IGN. She has some important points to offer that offer a contrasting perspective, I think, to Ranton. So I think it's good that it follows it. I'll summarize them again briefly for you. Games journalists, in her experience, are not pressured by their editors nor by companies to change their review scores. That's her experience. Now, we've seen that it happens, so bear in mind that this is just kind of the frame that she's evaluating from. This is just what she's seen. If anything, she was more afraid of her audience, which I can honestly understand. Many people who show up for reviews that are looking to have preconceived notions about a game validated. If you're thinking, hey, that sounds a lot like our definition of motivated reasoning. Yeah, you're right. You win the game, which is fair enough, right? I mean, we've seen examples where games media were willing to call out publishers and editors for shady practices. They're obviously willing to do that. I just gave you 5 or 6 examples where they do that. So, and second is that if objectivity in games media is important to you, and I've personally seen people do this, then you have no justification for harassing, insulting, or brigading critics who don't tell you what you want to hear. And that I think is pretty straightforward, but I've seen people do this. If you do this kind of thing, honestly, I'm not mad. I'm just real disappointed, and I wish you would reconsider, which is some powerful emotional manipulation right there, isn't it, gambling?
Yep. I think, yeah, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I have no shame. I'm an evil robot. In any case, 3, there is a disconnect between review scores and what they mean and the audience's perception of what they actually signify. So a 10 doesn't mean that a game is flawless, and a 5 doesn't mean a game is average. 10 actually means that in the opinion of that reviewer, that game is a masterpiece. Doesn't mean that they don't have flaws and they can't point out those flaws. It just means that, in their opinion, those flaws don't take away from the overall product, which is, for them, a masterpiece. Number 4, regarding like high average scores on outlets like IGN. And I've definitely looked at this and like kind of side-eyed the fact that a lot of games are like 7 to 9 out of 10. The games they review they're AAA games, and that's what most people play. They play AAA games, or they play like freaking mobile games, but I don't even count those people as people. But these are games that have high budgets and are generally like objectively good. They've got a big budget behind them. They've got high production value. They've got talented people, etc. IGN isn't going to waste their time reviewing shovelware titles that disappear into the vacuum of Steam after a week. It's worth noting that Fallout 76 and Crackdown 3 both got 5s, and those are both AAA games. And that's something that she brings up in her video, which I have linked below. Finally, positive reviews aren't going to get you in good with a company, in her opinion. Neither, in her experience, do negative reviews result in blacklisting, although we have seen that it is possible. So that's a lot. Let's take a look at chat here, so we can kind of pick up on things a little bit and maybe have a discussion with people. And then I can get into some interviews that I was able to have with a couple of prominent Total War casters and their experiences with early access. What's the name of the podcast? That's a really good question.
We need a name.
we need a name. If you guys have names, honestly, as long as it's not like offensive or racist, then we'll probably consider it.
Yeah. Yeah, we need a name, and we need, if anyone's an artist, we need some art, so it's not just like a black screen. Like,
yeah, honestly, if we have any like 2D artists out there that want to like make us a logo or something, I'd be super happy to pay for the premium streaming software, and so I could get the logo up there and have people have it shown to people.
Yeah.
Hello, Siddhartha. So it seems like people are just kind of following along right now. So I think maybe we can move on and just kind of finish off this section.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, with the, with her saying her experience and stuff, I think that's missing out a big chunk of review. It's missing out like the independent YouTube reviewers kind of thing who review games. And I think it's all very well saying that in her experience, they don't get blacklisted for negative or positive reviews. But I mean, from what I've seen, like Republic of Play, I know he used to work for CA, but he also got blacklisted, I think, for doing negative reviews and Arch Warhammer and all that kind of stuff.
That's a complicated one. Arch Warhammer, I think, is quite duly blacklisted because he'll like personally attack developers. And Darren, I think Darren's a really good guy, and I am subscribed to Republic of Play. I'm on their Discord, that kind of thing. But he did have an incident on a stream, which I didn't see. I've only ever heard rumor about. So I'm not 100% clear what happened there. But the blacklisting, from what I understand, comes from what was said on that stream, and it persists to this day.
I mean, my only point is I feel like it's a lot easier, or they're walking a much finer line of getting blacklisted or not, as when they're independent compared to if they're a built up, in loose quotes, reputable, review company.
I personally,
I haven't heard circumstances where IGN has been blacklisted from a game, or they were in one of the examples it gave where Konami decided they were going to blacklist them from Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2, their entire US. Yeah, but I mean, not like recently. I think there's been a stream of blacklisting for independent YouTube reviewers, whether there's complicated circumstances or not behind that. At the end of the day, there's still been quite a few, independent YouTubers blacklisted or something compared to companies.
I do agree, and I'll explain that a little bit later, but I agree to an extent. And I think that she's coming at it from the perspective of somebody who worked in a big outlet, right? So she doesn't have the perspective of smaller content creators. She does do a panel, which I have actually included in the description as well, and I highly recommend that you guys look at it because there's a bunch of like insiders, like indie devs, and Troy Baker is on there, and he worked on The Last of Us 2. He's like the voice of Joel and like some other characters. And they all sit down and they talk about like reviews and like who they're important to and yada yada yada. So that's on there, and I recommend that people go and take a look at it. But I think that she's speaking like solely from her experiences as working for a major publication, who I personally agree are much less likely. It's not impossible, but I think it's less likely for them to get blacklisted by big publishers as it is for someone who has less clout and less like reach and stuff like that. And I think that's probably pretty straightforward, but we'll talk about that in a second. I just want to jump into the interviews here. So as I mentioned, I was lucky enough to have Legend of Total War and Indie Pride sit down and chat with me about their experiences with early access. If you guys by some miracle haven't heard of either of these two, they're influential channels in single player and multiplayer spheres respectively for Total War Warhammer. Legend is purely focused on single player with a min-max highly efficient approach to campaign, while Indie primarily does multiplayer with some single player thrown in for spice. I regularly watch both of their channels, so I highly recommend that you check them out. I also want to thank both of them for their time, their candor, and their willingness to sit down with somebody who is just, I'm a total random, and they were willing to sit down and have a chat with me. So I really appreciate that. But in any case, so one of the questions I asked Legend is if he ever felt that he'd been singled out or denied access if he negatively reviewed a game, or if he had heard of anybody who'd had an experience like that. I didn't ask him for like names or anything, just that, just an example. So this is a quote for him. This is what he told me. He says that, yes, that definitely does happen. I won't give specific examples of people that I know who have been singled out or get special treatment. I've experienced a lot of this myself, especially on the singled out, like excluded category. It can wreak absolute havoc on your mental health as a content creator. At the end of the day, we're all dealing with humans, and it's not always clear who and what a company wants to work with. You might think, oh, I'm at this number of subscribers, I'm entitled to have the same early access as anybody else. That's not the case. And that's a position that made a lot of sense to me, as we mentioned earlier, and Ranton actually brings this up as well. EA copies, early access copies, do come from the marketing budget. And I think it's reasonable that companies view giving early access to content creators as an investment, and they therefore have some expectations. But there is also potentially a neglected part of this equation, which I think could easily escape the attention of people looking from the outside in. So Legend mentioned that every company you work with is different, and you also have to take that company into consideration, but also the person you're dealing with. So building a business relationship with the actual person who's giving you that early access, there's a human behind that. And that makes a big difference if you are particularly cold to that person or you just don't care about that person, they might ignore you. If early access is important to you, you have to build a relationship with the company, but also with the actual contact, which I think is an important part of the larger picture here, right? It's not simply a matter of give bad review, receive blacklist, or don't receive early access, as I think many consumers out there perceive it to be. There are some basic human elements, like the creator relationship with the marketing rep who handles them and doles out early access, that are worth noting and bearing in mind. Presumably, they don't have, or they do have the autonomy, rather, to exercise some judgment regarding who receives early access, who doesn't, when, and why they get it. So it isn't like a purely top-down decision. So one of the other questions I asked him was whether or not early access should even exist, like if that should be a thing at all. He says, yes, I think early access should be there, but I think people have to be a lot more careful with how they go about it, and that companies should maybe be a bit more fluid with how they go about it, because sometimes early access is not worth touching, and sometimes content creators, like he's been himself in this category, when you go from not getting early access and then you go to being like a bigger kind of deal, the companies start to take interest in you and they want to send you stuff, and you sort of like jump on everything. Everything you get, and you jump on everything that you get. And that can actually be a massive trap. Sometimes there's so many people who get early access that it's just actually not worth it at all, because the real value in early access is exclusivity. And if the exclusivity is tarnished, then that value can go down. So continue. In terms of early access, Creative Assembly specifically, as that's the company that he works with mostly, is giving people more early access. It's good for like the lower end guys, but it can also be bad for the top content creators. As for myself, that being himself, if I'm not given exclusive early access, I ain't going to touch it because it's not worth my time. Like for Three Kingdoms, I got the same early access as everyone else, everyone else got, but for me as a content creator, it's a no deal. I didn't touch it because of the content that I cover normally, and it does make you seem like a total douche to be like this, but it's not like I have hard feelings or anything. But if I don't get the special treatment, it's really not worth my time to cover that case. And let me start by saying that I think this is totally a reasonable position to take from a business standpoint, which is exactly what a professional YouTuber is at their core. They're a business person. Early access is important to content creators because of exclusivity. If everyone has access to it, it's basically no different from the game having been released, right? There's no functional difference there. And it's also great that Creative Assembly is giving a broader audience a chance to chime in on the quality of the title before it's released. I think that audiences can only benefit from a plethora of perspectives on a title. That's great. There is, however, potentially a niche where coercive behavior intended to pressure creators to toe a line can take place. Exclusive early access and the direct and indirect benefits that come with it do matter when it comes to getting views. And we've seen that review scores do matter, at least to publishers, and that they are willing to deny people early access for pretty spurious reasons. I'm referring to the incident with the IGN editor, Colin Moriarty, where he was denied access to a venue where they were showing some early gameplay of Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 because they didn't like the score that IGN had given to the previous title. So as I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to also talk with Indie Pride, and I got a few of his thoughts on early access as well. So I asked him mostly the same questions, although I did vary it a little bit. I asked him if he had ever felt any pressure to present a game that he was given advance access to as in either a positive or a negative light. He told me that he thinks one of the major issues people on YouTube have is that if you aren't as negative or positive towards a product, and this is something that I think a lot of peers echoes as well. If you aren't as negative or positive towards a product as people want you to be, or if you don't address the specific thing they want you to talk about, no matter how minuscule, it becomes very easy to throw out accusations of being a fanboy or a shill, or on the other end of that, a negative drama tuber who's just bashing on stuff because it gets views. The only pressure that he says he felt, and he thinks this is good because it means that he's human, is having empathy for the work that's put into the game. And when you meet the devs for a game, like you have this personal relationship with them, it's easier to see things from their perspective. That's fair enough. So he's never going to play a game and say, wow, this game is so good, while internally thinking it's trash or vice versa. The pressure he feels is to choose his words carefully so as to not attack or get personal with any developer. And I mentioned earlier, Arch Warhammer has no qualms doing that, and that is why he is definitely blacklisted. I think if any reviewer is level-headed and reasonable and doesn't accuse the devs of being like shitheads or lazy or going after them personally, you can pretty well say whatever you want. Lots of Total War overviews on YouTube are pretty scathing for people that are in the inner circle. And Indie Pride is actually really good about this, which is why I do enjoy his content. He's willing to, go after, flaws in the game and point them out alongside the things that are good, which I think is what a reviewer should do. You should be trying to be even-handed. But they're handled professionally and constructive in their feedback, so it's not a problem. So I asked him directly if he felt that there was more pressure from audience members with a bone to pick than from the developers themselves. He said there's definitely pressure from the viewer base. My overview of Troy was not positive overall in any way, shape, or form. It was about as neutral as a review can get, I think. Here's the game, here's the good, here's the bad, here's the stuff that I think should be looked at and improved. But he still had a few people say they lost respect for him because he wasn't as negative as they wanted him to be. Because somehow being more negative equates to being more truthful, which is probably a trap that people can fall into. I can see that being part of motivated reasoning, right? Like you have a preconceived notion about something and you want to go and find opinions that support that. And it's really, really easy to do and really easy to fall into that trap, which is something I think we should be cognizant of. But anyway, so this presents, I think, a really critical side of the issue and relates very directly to our earlier discussions on motivated reasoning, as I mentioned, and set, reset, overcorrection. My personal opinion is that audiences come to content creators because there is this perception that they are more reliable than traditional media outlets. And I think you probably agree with that, Gambling, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But the audience can also come burdened with their own preconceived notions about the quality of a product, which affects, in turn, their perception of the objectivity of the reviewer and the review that they create, thereby feeding the narrative that the content creator is being squeezed by indirect pressure from the publisher. Even if, and we've seen that there are legitimate reasons to believe that this is the case. I'm not saying that there isn't, but even if there is no known legitimate reason to believe that that's what's going on. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that there is potentially pressure created on content creators from both sides of the aisle, and that consumers themselves play an important part in that. And we're almost done here. I swear to God, we're almost done. And then we can have a discussion and I can like give you my thoughts, because I've just been relaying mostly what other people have told me. So my follow-up question was regarding the benefits that consumers enjoy from content creators, because we haven't really talked about that yet. And them having the opportunity to upload early access videos to YouTube and like show you what's going on. So he told me early access is definitely advantaged. Certainly better to have than not to have, obviously. But not necessarily a deal breaker in either way. Lots of channels don't have it and get great views. Plenty of channels have it and barely have an audience. The real tangible consumer benefit of early access is getting to see the game and hearing people's opinions before it releases. With an in-depth overview video, or especially a live stream, flaws with the game become readily apparent, whether a content creator is calling attention to them or not. And that's an important point, I think. If a developer is allowing early access live streaming of the game or giving content creators full builds a week before launch, that shows confidence in their product, because consumers know what to look for, and they're getting to see hours and hours of gameplay. It makes it very simple for a customer to make an informed purchasing decision in a situation like that, which was what was done for Three Kingdoms, where Creative Assembly streamed live for dozens and dozens of hours, showing off every single facet of the game. You pretty much know whether the purchase will be worth it or not at that point. Whether it appeals to you or not, that's up to you. So take Rome 2, for example. This was long before there was ever early access or anything for like content creators. And we know how Rome 2 turned out. Did you ever play it on release gambling?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you remember the last video. I told you about all the bugs that were in it and stuff with the siege towers and all that. But
right.
Yeah, it was a mess on release. I mean,
it was a tire fire. Let's be honest. Rome 2 on release was a nightmare.
And it wasn't just that. It looked so different to what they showed off in some of the... Well, I don't know whether it was early access or just from their trailers, but, you know, what they showed us before release and what we got was completely different.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
But CA themselves, this is Indie Pride's words again, CA themselves barely showed off the game. A lot of reviews weren't published until days after launch, and consumers had very little idea of how the game would actually play when they purchased it. When they purchased it at the end is, you know, my embellishment. And it just so happened to have the most horrible launch in Total War history, which I think is hard to disagree with. On the flip side, Thrones of Britannia had a lot of problems, but it also had early access, an early access period that let people show it off and give feedback. And quite a few of its major issues were addressed quickly, specifically because of feedback from content creators. And just as an aside, whether or not you like Thrones of Britannia or not, I personally didn't. The fact that this system existed is, at least in his opinion, and I think this is a fair position to have, that it allowed it to be improved. It could have been worse, basically. But yeah, so these issues were addressed quickly, specifically because of the feedback from content creators and YouTube/forum comments. Not that I think it was an incredibly entertaining or awesome game, but having the confidence to say, here, play it, tell us what you think, and show your viewers, unquestionably put it in a better spot than it would have been otherwise. And it does seem to be the case, at least insofar as Creative Assembly are concerned. Some developers are willing to take into account the feedback of content creators. So let me give you an example. Recent update to Warhammer 2 called the Nuts and Bolts update, which included some nerfs for several Greenskin hero abilities introduced in the Warden of the Paunch. I think one of them was Sneaky Stab In, there was the Mushroom thing that makes units rampage, and then there's Your Next, which is what Grimgore had, and they cut down the range on those units, and they were nerfed. And I saw a lot of these changes proposed on one of Indie Pride's videos. They may have been proposed elsewhere as well, but I did see them specifically on Indie Pride's videos several weeks before the patch went live. I think there's certainly a case to be made for early access having tangible benefits for titles that move beyond the scope of merely being a market strategy to increase pre-orders, and that instead translates into direct benefits for the end user experience. I think that is borne out, at least by the examples that Indie Pride has given us. Whether or not that applies in every case, take a case by case, basically. But specifically for Total War games, I think we have seen that in action. So, all right. That's a lot of stuff to digest, isn't it? That's a lot of
That's
crap.
40 minutes of stuff to digest right there.
40 minutes of me talking. I told you before we got started that I like the sound of my own voice.
Yeah.
But I'm sure at the end of this, there's some people that want to know, what to believe. Yeah, that's a lot of opinions we just took on. Some of them are very opposed to one another. So what's true? Is there a grand conspiracy gambling? Do you think that reviewers and content creators are lying?
I think honestly, the lizard men are behind this.
The lizard men, of course.
Yeah, lizard men. Yeah.
But no, I don't believe that they are. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I don't think that reviewers and content creators are lying to us.
No.
At least not all the time. And I think
there
all deception.
I think there are odd cases when maybe they could be. I mean, we'll never know for sure, and it depends on the game. And I mean, obviously this isn't early access, but there's plenty of examples of YouTubers being a bit corrupt and doing something they shouldn't be. Like YouTube, there was a CSGO thing where these people didn't say they were sponsored by these gambling companies, and yet they were,
right, and they should be
showing,
like 100% open.
So I don't think, I don't think you can say it never happens. I'm sure there are cases where a YouTuber takes a check and whatever, and but I think it's very unlikely, and it's a minority. For sure.
Right. And I agree with that. And I think just to go back to some of our earlier points, the Ranton video brings up excellent points about cognitive bias and the subtle effects that this can have on our judgment. And while you can't eliminate that entirely, I think that you can at least try to minimize that, and that people can make their own decisions based on that. I also believe Lana when she says that she never witnessed blatant corruption while working in the industry. Though I will say, just as a personal aside, I think her video would have benefited from coverage of some of the major scandals involving publishers, because without having that side, I think it obviously presents the perspective of somebody who's an insider, but I think it would have benefited a little bit from having that sort of like balancing perspective. But it isn't to say that it never happens, because clearly it does. We've seen it. I also believe in Pride when he says that he feels comfortable articulating any criticisms that he has about Creative Assembly games, as long as it's done professionally and respectfully. I also believe Legend when he says that he's seen people or felt personally singled out for special treatment. And I don't think the cognitive pressures that Ranton discusses should just be waved away as unimportant. So if you want to take anything away from this discussion at all, other than J Monsters won't shut up if you give him a platform. If you want to take anything away from this, I think it should be this. Between the erratic nature of game scores and their effect on sales, we've seen that it kind of goes up and down, to many differing experiences and opinions that we've covered in this episode, one thing to me at least is clear. It's important to be aware of the nature of the relationship between the sources that you go to for coverage and the bodies that make products for consumption. Be that news, video games, or bulk plastic drink umbrellas, whatever it happens to be. As well as their relationship with the product itself. Gamers have preferences. Everyone has. I mean, only gamers obviously have preferences. Everyone outside the hobby are cold, emotionless robots that want to keep you from getting high warlord gear in Battlegrounds. You should just disregard them. But seriously, find sources whose take you appreciate and support those creators. For example, there's a Mass Effect reviewer. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he played Mass Effect, and he was like, I hate this game. It's too hard. But it's an RPG, and he forgot that he could assign skill points to stuff. So naturally, he sucked. He's like this level 1 NPC running around in the high level zone, getting his throat torn out. Obviously, that's not going to go well for him. So look for people who have the preferences that you think are going to lead them to make a review that's beneficial for you, and also dabble in the sphere of those whose take you don't necessarily like, just to see how the other side lives. That's something that I had to do a lot here, because I will admit that I watched Ranton's video and I went into this and I'm like, yeah, game reviewers are corrupt. All these people are lying to us. But then you read more about people's experiences and you kind of recognize that you had a certain way of looking at things. And that's not necessarily 100% accurate, as much as we like to believe that we're, objective and we're in control of all of our thought processes. We're not.
I mean, you gotta remember that, all these things are subjective. I know it's called an official review, but you don't take that as fact. I mean, it's all subjective. We all think differently, so it's worth having a mix of things, like you say,
Exactly. Look at where this is coming from. where these people are coming from, what their relationship is with the people who make the product. That's just called being a good consumer. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
Or even mix it up between the independent reviewers and the official ones like IGN and, the official critics and the obviously, public, get a good mix before you, spend your money and, on a £60 game or whatever.
Oh, hell yeah. I do both, because this is actually something that Lana talks about in her video that we didn't really get to, but I said we would. That critics tend to write for their peers. And this is one of her biggest criticisms about the game news industry, like gaming media, is that they write their reviews for their peers. So we see that a disconnect, right? So there's The Last of Us 2, which has a 95 on Metacritic, I think, right now. It might have gone up since then, or it might have gone down. I don't know. But and then you have the user review, which is tiny. And so people are looking at this as a critic from this high art perspective, right? And that's what appeals to them. And, maybe gameplay isn't as important as storytelling in video games. One sec, I'm going to clear my throat, but I'm actually going to turn off my microphone this time. There we go. Oh, sorry, it wasn't done. But then the people who actually get there and they play the game, and they're concerned about the fate of their favorite characters, gameplay, and they're very focused on that. And there's this big disconnect there. So, yeah, look at the way that different people are looking at it, what sort of the strengths of it are, and then you can evaluate that on your own. And for the love of God, don't go to game reviewers and who are saying things that you don't like to hear and be like, you're a shill, you're a fanboy, you're X, Y, and Z, you're a super negative drama tuber, whatever. That if you care, 1 second, I need water. 40 minutes of talking plus allergies, it just doesn't do anything good for me. But if you care about objectivity in games media, you can't do that shit, because that doesn't help. If anything, that makes it worse, because they're afraid of you and what you're going to do to them, which I don't think is okay. And also, stop buying into shitty games that hate you. This is a personal aside. I was shocked by the 9 million people who bought Star Wars Battlefront after everything that happened and came out with that. EA tries to bleed us dry with loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront, and 9 million people still bought that shit. Give a care about industry practices enough to look into the publishers and the people who produce the content for titles that you love. And that's all I have to say. Thank you. Good night. The podcast is over. Sorry, gambling. I'm kidding. But let's take a look at chat here. Wendy's channel disappears suddenly. Oh. Are you still there, gambling? Did you explode on me? Oh no, I think his internet went out. Can you guys still hear me? I think you can. Oh no. No, I think his internet just goes out sometime. Actually, no, I killed and ate him off screen so that I could absorb the power of his sexy European accent. Good. So you guys can still hear me. So what do you guys think about all of that? Let's take a few minutes and kind of discuss it. Where do you stand? Did this change your mind at all? Did it change your perception? Or are you just kind of you still don't trust gaming media in general? Okay, so this is Calvin Van Zyl here. I understand the company's objective is to turn a profit, so I can see the inherent conflict of interest potential when it comes to buying YouTubers or reviews to that effect. And I think it's fair. I think that there is a conflict of interest. And I genuinely believe that there are a lot of content creators out there who do their very best to give you something genuine that accurately represents the product. And if I didn't think that, I wouldn't follow a lot of the YouTubers that I do. I also, as I mentioned before, I think that Ranton makes some good points about certain cognitive biases and whether or not people are willing to, put themselves out on a limb in every case. So I think that probably the best way to mitigate that maybe is to try and find outlets that you think are really reliable, that will give you hot takes, that are willing to, kind of stand up and say these things. And then, just compare and contrast. Be an informed consumer. Don't just assume that everyone is lying to you. Just come more from the position that they have a perspective. Be aware of their relationships with the media companies who give them things for early access, and then make a decision based off of that. And whether or not you trust them or you don't is entirely up to you. And you know what, Artorias? I think that a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people have a lot of distrust in media, and there are good reasons to. There are good reasons to, and we've seen a few of them here specifically as relate to the gaming news, like media. But there are other reasons that you should, approach things with a little bit of skepticism. And I don't think that doesn't necessarily have to be an indictment of the other side. I think that that's just what you should do generally. You bought the DLCs for Europa Universalis. That's a Paradox game, isn't it? I'm not super familiar with Paradox, but I have heard tales of their DLC, and I've certainly looked at the library before, and it's a hideous monstrosity. There's a lot of stuff in there that you have to buy, and I can definitely see why that would turn people off, for sure. And it does present sort of a barrier for entry, and I think that Warhammer is actually kind of getting to that point as well, with all the DLC that's available, and the fact that you need to buy like 2 games basically in order to get all of the races and to play them. I think that it's a lot. I think might be time for a bundle soon. But yeah, I can definitely see how inflating the market basically with DAC is just like flooding it. That's the word I wanted, not inflating. Flooding the market with DLC can be really intimidating and really frustrating for some players who just want to get at the core experience and kind of feel like maybe they have to have all these DLCs in order to really truly enjoy the game. And I think that that's a criticism we can also level at CA with some of the new lords and stuff like that. And some of them are free. So Imric is a big power creep feature in some of the new patches. But Grom is behind a paywall, and the power creep there is incredible. It's crazy. So, and that affects more than single player too. Like single player, yeah, you can kind of get away with it, but like also multiplayer. I challenge anyone out there to take a basic high elf army with no DLC and go and fight like Imric or something. Or not Imric, but like go and fight one of the really powerful DLC lords, like Ikit Claw. You will get dumpstered because they're so good. They're so much better. Oh no, you're back. I'm sorry, Gambling. I didn't even realize. I'm so sorry. There you go.
Hello. So someone in my house thought it was a good idea to stream 4K football.
4K football? Oh
yeah.
Did you yeet the TV out the window?
Basically. Drop kicked it right out of there.
I'm sad that we didn't get to hear that.
I mean, yeah, I'm a karate pro, so it's what I do.
This man is dangerous. He's a human weapon. You can hear it. You can hear it in his voice, can't you?
Oh no. So did I miss anything or?
No, you pretty well got the gist of it. So like, what's your thoughts on that? Did it change your mind about your perceptions of gaming media, or do you still kind of, I don't know, where do you stand?
I think it enforces I know you brought up Arch Warhammer being mean to the devs and stuff, but to me, I think it should still stay up there. I mean, I'm just going to bring it up. I'm a big believer in free speech, so I don't think things like that, even if it's offensive to the devs, I mean, it should still be up there as if he's put it out there in public, kind of thing. I mean, he shouldn't do it, but if it's up there, then he shouldn't be like blacklisted just because he has slightly more or slightly less nuanced opinions on it, because they're still his views on the game, even if he puts it in a way that isn't nuanced. But
I think that's fair, and I'm inclined towards the position that if someone has things to say that are, even if they're kind of dumb, right? Like even if they're not like intelligent, nuanced opinions like what you said, you should still let them say it, and then let people decide whether or not that's something that they believe in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm all about giving more autonomy to the consumer, and even if you take a video down that's really offensive to the devs, that still takes away a thing for the consumer to see about that game.
There's also another side of that for me.
Oh yeah, of course. There are two sides to it. I mean,
in that, how do I put this? They should be held to, a certain kind of standard, and it's hard to be like, yeah, no, they have to give everybody early access. That's actually one of the things that Ranton comes out with is like, what's an ideal solution? And one of them is, which is very much imperfect, and he admits as much, is that we just give everyone over a certain subscriber account early access, and that's it, can't be revoked for any reason. I think that companies should have a little bit of control over what people are also saying about their game. So if or saying about
where do you draw the line?
Oh, that's the real kicker, isn't it?
Because when you give a company the power, or you allow them to have the power to take down things they find offensive, well, what's to stop that company from saying, if you criticize our game, I mean, I'm not saying it will happen, but if a company says, we don't want any criticism and we'll take down any criticism, where does it stop?
Well, that's where I feel like discussions like this tend to be important, because this is where you can form opinions based on, a broad spectrum of experience and discussion. And you can be like, well, maybe I want to support these people, and maybe these are my reasons for supporting people. And you can have an impact, and you can have an opinion. You can play a role in kind of helping to shape the practices that are at large in the industry or in government or whatever it is. I just feel that there is a lot of pressure that we as consumers and just general people can exert in this arena, and a lot of us
there's tons of pressure. Yeah,
a lot of us choose not to. 9 million people bought Star Wars Battlefront, even though there was that huge controversy surrounding it, like marketing gambling to children, essentially. I think the EU has made them pull that from their games in Europe, at the very least, because
the UK hasn't. UK hasn't just like, nope, it's not gambling, not at all.
But I'm pretty sure the EU did take, like, the European Union Parliament took that stance, and they're like, yeah, no, this is selling gambling to children. People are still like, nah, shovel that into the cart. I'll take an extra helping of that. Hell yeah, 9 million copies sold. I just don't get that.
I mean, the big problem is, as you say, like 99% of gamers complain about microtransactions, but there's still a solid proportion who still buy games and buy those microtransactions. And I don't play sports games, but the people who play sports games are the ones at fault here. It all started with FIFA and Madden, and I think that tactic, because of the sports gamers and how successful it is with them, has seeped into the other games.
That's fair enough. I mean, I'll take your word on that. I don't really play sports games because I don't think that they don't appeal to me very much, and I think that they're all kind of the same game.
Well, they're the same every year. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's just printing free money, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, another point is how, I've seen before how, several YouTubers will review a game, and all of them but one has a certain opinion on the game, and then you'll see in the comments of the YouTuber who disagrees, blah blah blah, you're wrong, blah blah blah, and it's obviously a case of, and people start, maybe insulting this YouTuber, and it gets to a point of that kind of cognitive bias or whatever, when people watch a review of a YouTuber they like, they see a YouTuber they don't know make a review that they disagree with, so they try and shout it down.
Right, that's the brigading that I was talking about. And honestly, if you guys feel the need to do that, just head on over to Gambling's channel. It's totally fine if you want to abuse him.
Please no. please
no. But seriously,
I'll tell you what you can do. You can come over and subscribe, and one day I'll upload my video and start my YouTube career.
But seriously, if you believe in open and honest discourse, be it in games media, journalism, whatever arena that happens to be, if you believe in that kind of thing, you can't go and shout people down. You can't go and brigade people, because God damn it, you're part of the problem.
Yep, exactly.
You're part of the same group of people that want to pull everything that they don't like from any platform that it's hosted on. And you know what? It's a real shame, because if I'd have done that, if I'd have not given a shit about anybody else's opinion and just stuck with what I first believed when I went into this podcast, what kind of discussion would we be having right now? We would just be talking about things we already believed, and none of us would learn anything. None of us would grow personally. None of us would like expand our horizons. Like it's a shame, and it does yourself a disservice. And I think it does. I think it does the rest of the community a disservice too, and like just generally to anybody who believes the things that you believe. Test those beliefs. Be brave enough to test your own convictions. That's, I think, an important thing to take away from this.
So I've linked the YouTube channel. If you guys round up to 80 subs, I'll make a YouTube video next week.
He'll do a face reveal.
No.
Wearing nothing but plastic wrap.
No. I'll
and he's going to flag it as appropriate for children because he's a sick bastard.
Jesus Christ. Well, I'm actually surprised with what goes on in that Canadian mind of yours.
You don't want to know. I just want to quickly address something from Calvin Wenzel here. He says, that's the problem with free speech for online discourse, public discourse. It's impersonal and a distance and typically anonymous. And I agree with that. The second that you like put people in a position where they can say whatever they want anonymously. Yep. The quality of what a lot of people have to say, this isn't true for everybody, but the quality of what a lot of people have to say just through the goddamn like floor. It's terrible.
And another problem is you're not allowed opinions anymore, like through some people. Like it always escalates. Well, not always, but most of the time it escalates to a point where you just end up insulting each other. And it is a shame. It
is a shame. And I can do that with gambling because he's barely a human being. He likes sports games. Let's be honest.
No, I didn't say that. I do not like sports games. Sports games are the bane of humanity. They should be burned in the taken to Mordor, you know, and thrown in the fire.
That's a hot take indeed.
Yeah.
So that's gonna round off the first half. Let's talk a little bit about kind of gambling's side of this. So this is like early access. And correct me if I'm wrong here, gambling. This is like early access that you can purchase for games that aren't quite complete yet. So the development is ongoing. Is that's right?
Yeah, right? Like Bannerlord released recently, early access, because it's still in development, even though it's been like my whole life.
Oh man,
it was like announced when I was like 10 or 11 or something.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I've been waiting for Bannerlord forever. Yeah. But go ahead and give us your take on that.
I mean, the topic that always springs to mind with early access is Star Citizen. Now, I don't know if you know about Star Citizen, but obviously it started a Kickstarter. I think it was like 2013, and it was supposed to release that same year, I think, but later on. But it got delayed to 2014. And even then, it released early access. And it's still like it released as an alpha. And even now, it's still in alpha stage. It hasn't even moved on to the beta stage, which is crazy to me.
That is really nuts.
And now I think they're closing in on $300 million. So $300 million has been pumped into this Star Citizen game, and
that's crazy.
It doesn't have a whole lot to show for it because
that's like the gross sales of Fallout New Vegas in the first year. That's nuts.
Yeah, and there's also big controversy because they've also added in microtransactions to a game that isn't finished.
Of course they have,
and has been paid $300 million to make it, because apparently the guy said. I've got some articles here, but I don't know if you want to put them in the description or something. But in one of these articles, the guy said that like they're running out of money, so he's continually trying to raise more money because apparently $300 million isn't enough. So it's just mental to me, and like the whole argument is, you know, if you don't like an unfinished game, don't buy it. But the problem is it sets a precedent, because if you look at how games have come out over the years, more and more times they come out in an unfinished state. I mean, look at Rome 2. That came out completely unfinished, and their answer was to patch it. So even though officially it wasn't early access, it may as well have been early access. Just like quite a few other games that have released with loads of bugs and missing features and stuff, and the developers have said, okay, we'll patch this to make it better.
Okay, so let me ask you a quick question. Just sort of based on the research that you've done, looking at like early access games, like I know Subnautica was on early access for a million years, that kind of thing. That turned out to be a really good game.
Yeah.
But do you think, like, what are some of the benefits that you see to this, and like what are some of the more like problematic, kind of pernicious things, like, you know, for example, a game getting stuck in development hell for 7 or 8 years and then not living up to expectation when it releases? Like, what are some of the things you noticed?
Well, I mean, obviously one of the main benefits for early access is community feedback. You know, it is almost like giving early access to the YouTubers, but on a bigger scale, because you've got a bigger, you know, surplus of people that can do it. Of
course.
But I mean, Steam Greenlight is obviously where this kind of early access thing came, I think. You know, and the problem is a lot of people, like indie developers, some good, some bad, but some people just see early access as, oh, I can make a quick buck, you know. So they release an early access game and they stick with it for maybe a year or two, and you know, update it. But then 2 years later, it's still unfinished, and they just drop it.
Was there a title
something else
that stood out to you as like kind of exemplifying that? Just so like people listening, if they see this title or they see this developer, they're like, well, maybe not.
Well, the thing is, I can't name one in particular because a lot of these things have gone dark. Like I just remember going through Steam Greenlight back in the day, because I think they've changed it now, and seeing all these games, you know, whatever early access, 10 quid or something, and then not seeing it because the developer of this game dropped it and they moved on to something else, so it came off the Steam page or whatever, you know. I will do a quick. But what's your experience with early access games?
The only early access game, the only game that I honestly believed was going to be awesome, and that I didn't even care if it like didn't go anywhere else than where it was, that I purchased, was Subnautica. And I have not regretted that. So I don't know if I'm a good person to ask about this. That's my only experience, and it was overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I love Subnautica. I don't.
Well, I think Subnautica is a good example of what early access can bring to gaming. You know, I think it's a really good example of the positives. Are
you there? Did you crash again?
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Okay. Did you hear what I said?
No, you cut off there.
Oh. So with Subnautica, I think it's a really good example of the positive things early access can bring.
Right.
So I've got I mean, it's from Reddit. It seems very detailed, though. I will send that to you. You just look on the notes page here, because obviously you don't have much experience with early access, so it's good for you to see these.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about Star Citizen.
Yeah.
What's some of the controversy surrounding Star Citizen? What's reasons that people should look at that game and maybe kind of be like,
well, the age of the game alone is a warning sign. I mean, it released in alpha in 2014. You know.
Right. It's been 6 years.
So it's been 6 years, and it's like, if it had moved on to beta now, I mean, that's still bad, but you know, at least that's progress. You know,
right?
It's still alpha, like, and that is crazy to me. And it's like, this guy, I think Star Citizen is a case of the developer being, firstly, overly ambitious and mismanaging the project, and mismanaging like the allocation of money and workload and stuff. Because I think he promised like a galaxy with 100 million stars.
He literally promised the universe.
Yeah, literally promised the universe, and he's ended up with two planets, a few asteroids, and a sun that's been fully detailed or
Oh
something.
my god, that's like being promised a Ferrari and getting like a tricycle with Ferrari wheels. Yeah. That's crazy.
And it's not even that; it's also the fact that they put some effort into making these ship skins or whatever that have been sold as microtransactions or whatever for people to buy. And that is crazy to me. The fact, I mean, microtransactions are bad already, but it's crazy that someone can sell microtransactions in a game that isn't feature complete.
You know, that could be a topic for a future podcast. I feel like there's a lot to be said about microtransactions and how the gaming industry tries to offset the cost, the very much rising cost of development. Because like titles have been, you know, $60, or you know, if you're in Australia, it's $100. But you know, that's a crazy world in Australia anyway. But for the most part, it's like $60 to $70. The price has been static.
Yeah,
we could talk about that as like an entire episode.
Yeah. So this thing I showed you, it was 2 years ago. It's a Reddit post. I'm sure we can share it with others, but
I'm looking at it right now.
So
that's startling.
So 22% of this like sample of games that came out. I mean, this is 2013, so there wasn't a lot of early access games. It's out of 37, and 22%, so that's 8, were abandoned or otherwise had their development postponed indefinitely. So this is where there's obviously a promise of, yeah, we're going to do this with the community. We're going to build the game up. And then people bought this game and then with more than 2 hours on, obviously, and then it's been abandoned and they can't get their money back, I assume. So that's pretty crazy. I mean, so that's 8 games abandoned. 8 out of 12 games have entered early access in 20th of March, so that's like the first day possible, basically. Right. That's so when this started, 8 of the 12 games that were scheduled for early access had launched or whatever, and since then they've had a proper release. So you know, it's definitely one of those like mixed kind of reviews for this topic. You know, there are good things and there are bad, and I think the bad news definitely gets more exposure. But it's like I'd say with Bannerlord, that came out in early access recently, and it does have very positive reviews on Steam, but it's been in development for like, you know, 8 years or whatever.
Such a long time. Oh my god, I've been waiting for Butterlord since like yeah, it's nearly been a decade. That's crazy.
You know what was heart crushing for me, right? I waited so long for the game, and on the first day of release, I bought it. I'm done because I didn't look at the specs. So I bought Bannerlord, and it just didn't run at all. So I had to refund it. So I've been waiting like 8 years for this game. I finally get it, and then I have to get rid of it because I can't run it.
That's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating. Yeah, it's I don't know. But yeah, so this Star Citizen, 2.5 million players have funded the game.
That's crazy.
And it's still out. That's 2.5 million pissed off people.
Have they issued some sort of like, not necessarily a spreadsheet. They're probably not going to give you like the financial kind of minutiae, but
well, I think that was on their
explained a little bit.
I mean, I think that was on their Kickstarter page, because obviously they break down where it goes on their Kickstarter and the stretch goals. I think they actually reached a few stretch goals or something. So the fact that they thought they could do it with less than, you know, 300 million or whatever it was, and then they're still in alpha now, like, it's crazy to me.
So would it be fair to say that you think that like some early access, it can actually it's like rife for abuse? Like there's the possibility of people just sucking money out of you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to go as far to say early access is a scam, but I think it's very beneficial to a developer to keep their game in early access. You know?
Makes sense.
But like they could just push out loads, like small updates they could push out an update once every 3 months or something, with one new feature or something, and they could just keep that going forever. And obviously a benefit of early access for a player, if it's done right with like Subnautica, is you can see that game grow over time. So you can probably get a lot of replayability out of it. You know, play it when it first comes out, you know, check it out, and then 2 years later it's a completely different game.
Okay. I have another question for you.
Yeah.
What do you feel the difference is between early access, something that you pay to do, and an alpha or a beta test? Are they the same thing?
There isn't
a paid alpha test?
I don't think there's a difference at all. The only difference is we idiots on Steam pay money to go into a beta test that the company has to do anyway. So really, they're getting not only free labor out of it, they're getting money, so they don't have to pay testers to do it for them. And when you think of it like that, it's actually a really dumb move to buy an early access game just on the face of it, of the fact that we're paying them to test their game for them.
I feel that's a fair position to take, especially if you're one of the people who have paid into these games that have been in early access, especially for 6 years. My God,
I know.
That's crazy. I mean, The Last of Us 2, I think, took 6 years to develop, so it's not like completely unheard of. And presumably by paying for early access, part of the benefit is that like you're not paying the full release price, I assume. But you mentioned they had microtransactions in Star Citizen.
Well, I don't know if it was directly in the game, but they were selling, maybe it was on the website or whatever, so you had to, but either way they were selling like spaceship skins basically.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't sit right with me. You've already paid for early access. That's part of what their development costs go to fund.
And so that time to make a spaceship skin could be going to like do a texture on a planet or something.
Right, yeah.
You know? It's crazy to me. I just don't understand how it's kind of like microtransactions. Like I don't understand how people are okay with it. You know, I get there are some good examples of early access games, but in a way, I think morally early access is a bad thing,
right?
Because you're paying the company to test the game for them.
I will offer a slightly dissenting opinion in that.
Okay.
It can for an indie studio, and there needs to be ways, I guess, to kind of keep people honest. And you know, development it can sometimes drag itself out. It happens, but I think for indie developers, maybe early access is something that can be beneficial for them as it helps them kind of pay their day-to-day bills. But at the same time, you could also just start a Kickstarter campaign. From my understanding, and this maybe I'm not offering as much of a dissenting opinion as I thought I was going to, but I will say that I think it can be beneficial for indie developers who have costs that they need to cover. So people buying in, it's sort of like it's like investing in a company, right? That you're not like or a Kickstarter that you're not sure is going to start up. But you could also run a Kickstarter campaign, or you could crowdfund, and that's I know is how Team Cherry originally made Hollow Knight, and Hollow Knight is flippin' awesome. And I'm going to put a little plug here for Hollow Knight. If you guys haven't played it, it's a little 2D side-scrolling RPG. It's amazing. Got a great difficulty curve, a really somber story, a beautiful soundtrack. The artwork's amazing. Go and play it. But they crowdfunded the development of those games, and consequently, they release all the DLC for free as a result of that, because they've already taken money to do the development costs and that sort of thing, and then everything else that gets sold from the original game, that's gravy for them. I think that's one way that an indie studio can subsidize themselves, but I think that early access can also be beneficial for them for that exact same reason. So I don't know, but like you said, there's some really good examples of it just ended up becoming a mire that just sucks money out of people, especially if they're engaging in microtransactions when you've already paid for early access. That really doesn't sit right with me at all. That seems wrong.
Well, and as Dustin's not sure what we mean by morally, but I just think that a game company should in an ideal world, a game company should have to pay people to test their games, because it not only creates jobs, but it they shouldn't give it over to the consumer, take money from the consumer, and basically get the consumer to test the game that they then want to sell to other consumers later.
Yeah.
It's just like we're paying them to do work for them and giving them money for the privilege.
So we have a couple of other like kind of minor things here that we also want to talk about. But let's have a little bit of discussion here. I think this is just going to end up being a really long podcast, and we should just deal with it.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about that? Early access games, do you think it's worth it? Do you think that it's a paid beta? Do you think that it's maybe a viable kind of source of revenue for smaller studios, and that maybe the end result can be more games from, non AAA publishers that maybe don't get mired in, the same stuff that we've talked about earlier in this podcast? I don't know. What do you guys think?
So the clever merchant says, well, if people want to pay for it, it's the consumer choice. And it is the consumer choice, and that's a sad fact. But microtransactions are a consumer choice. Are they a good thing for the game industry? I'd probably argue they're not. Which is why in some countries they've actually been banned.
Fair enough. Certainly certain kinds of microtransactions, specifically the loot boxes where they're like, you could get this, but it's not guaranteed.
But the thing is, their argument is those loot boxes are consumer choice for the people who want to, skip the line or whatever.
Right. But we have seen that they do target these things at certain people.
Oh yeah.
What's it called? Whaling, basically, where they try to focus on people who are more likely to spend money, and they're going to make up for all the other people who decide to opt out of it. And that, I think, is predatory for sure.
Yeah, see, that's the thing when Calvin says you'll just wait for us and other YouTubers to buy early access games and see if it's worth it.
That's right. We take the hits so you don't have to.
Yeah.
We're the sacrificial lamb. That's all right.
And the thing is, it hurts me even more because I'm just against the principle of early access games. But
I mean, I barely do it. Like I said, the one experience I've had with early access is when I bought maybe I bought Forest 2. I think that might have been an early access. Yeah, it's changed since then. I can't remember if they updated it or not, or if it was actually early access. But I bought Subnautica and I freaking loved it. Love Subnautica. Great game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do we want to talk about some of the other like little minor topics we had lined up?
Yeah, do a bit of a news roundup and our opinions on it. Yeah, sure.
For sure. So there's this is going to affect a lot of people in the Total War community, I think. Specifically, everyone else who doesn't care about Total War isn't going to bother you all that much. So Pixelated Apollo decided he was going to walk away from Total War as a series. I went through his Twitter feed a little bit, and he had some very strong opinions on the direction of the Total War series. And he expressed some of those in his video as well, which you guys can go and check out. It's on his channel. It's posted a few days ago. Real easy to find. I don't know. What's your take on that, Gambling? I presume that you've watched the video as well.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
I think he's got valid reasons. And if I was in his shoes, I'd probably walk away too. Because I know that as he says in the video, he's a historical player, and I'm a historical player. We know that from the last podcast.
Nerds.
And all I'll say is it's very, very frustrating that, CA has its roots in historical Total War games, right? Mm-hmm. But for the past, 2, 3, I'd even argue the Saga game, Britannia, like that wasn't even a proper... It was historical, but it wasn't like a mainline historical game. So
right, it was a Saga title.
So the past 4 Total War games haven't been historical, and it's a shame because Three Kingdoms should have been historical. At least
you don't think Ooh, that's a hot take. So you don't feel that Three Kingdoms is a historical game?
No, not at all.
Have you had a chance to play with the records mode at all? I asked because
records mode is records mode is like, I don't know, it's like an artist, right? Drawing. This is going to be a weird example, but the picture of like Jesus Christ and the disciples sitting down and having
the Last Supper.
Right? Yeah. So it's like an artist drawing the Last Supper, leaving out Jesus, and then saying, "Okay, the people who want to have Jesus, I'll draw a stick man on a cross."
Ooh.
And that's Jesus. Like
that's strong,
exactly the same.
Strong condemnation.
Well, it is because
I, for one, welcome our new Stickman savior.
or worship the Stickman Jesus. Yeah, but
Right.
it's like that. It's just there's no.
It's a pale imitation, basically.
Yeah, it's a pale imitation, is what I'm saying.
Okay. That's.
Oh, Dustin doesn't follow my analogy.
I've definitely got that experience, or not that experience. I don't own Three Kingdoms currently.
Yeah.
But I've definitely got that sense from like listening to people talk about records mode. And largely there are like a few mechanics there that do kind of change it up a little bit. Fatigue, for example. There's no heroes. That's the other big thing. But at the end of the day, it does kind of seem like it's just the same product, but with less going on. And what you told me just now and what I've read does seem to echo that somewhat. So I could see that being a case for it not being a pure historical title in the sense of
it's not even a little bit like, I mean, yeah, maybe that's too far, but it's not even like all records mode does is get rid of the heroes. So really records mode takes away features. It doesn't even add features.
And that's kind of the issue that I have with it as well, is that there's not a distinct experience there from what I understand. It's just there's less things. There's not like, oh, record mode has X, Y, and Z, and this is what makes it kind of a unique experience. And I think that there was room to do that. It's just, it's just romance with less. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is historical fans like not necessarily historical accuracy, but historical authenticity, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize the difference between those, but I
get it. Accuracy is like having the right guy holding the right banner in the right unit, and then wow, I totally lost my train of thought. But the other option there is like having things be kind of grounded in reality, in the sense that there's not like dragons or people like, there's not like the wuxia stuff in Three Kingdoms where one hero carves his way through 600 people, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the clever merchant, saying worth mentioning how arcadey Total War game, and that's another problem.
That's something else that Apollo brought up as well.
Yeah, I mean, the historical fan base, two things go hand in hand: historical authenticity and realism, right? Or as realistic as a video game can get in that sense. And then I am kind of generalizing a bit, but to me, as a historical player, it seems like the fantasy players who like playing Warhammer are much more okay with it being arcadey and, obviously fantasy.
Right, and it does
lend
itself well to the title, at the very least.
Yeah, which is why the two sides are being driven apart, and if CA is not careful, they're going to lose like a chunk of their fan base from whichever side is opposite to what they choose.
I just don't know where they'd lose it to. I mean, CA is the only people who are making these games right now, and like RTS as a genre isn't nearly as popular as it used to be.
I mean, you say that, and yeah, they do have quite a big monopoly, but it's like the Ultimate General series does well, and I know it's not exactly Total War, but it's a similar line.
It is that large scale kind of experience, and it's actually cool because the guy who did Darth Mod actually went on to make that game, which is really neat. So that does like sort of come out of Total War and like a response to CA, and I guess a certain sort of way. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreaching there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. I just hope that CA starts to lose their monopoly, and then maybe they'll buck their ideas up and like actually not mistreat, not take for granted either side. Because at the moment, I think they're blatantly disregarding and taking advantage of the historical fan base.
Oof. Oh, strong words.
I have strong opinions on this. It's like, I've been a fan since, my first Total War game was Rome Total War, and it's since then I've basically played every Total War and like historical, and I just think I think CA is forgetting where their roots lie, and yeah, they can pursue this fantasy, but there's only so many fantasy IPs that I think people want.
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's Warhammer, that's almost done. Some are saying they should make a 40k. Some are saying they should make Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, right? That's 4.
That'd be cool.
Yeah,
but no,
I'm not.
we've
I'm not
already done
saying
that.
it. No,
We've already
it would,
got Third Age.
well, yeah, we got your mods. Here you go.
We've got
plug your mod.
Silmarillion, which is completely perfect in every way.
Yeah,
Only
throw a
way to
link in
make
the
it.
description. Yeah. Yeah. So that's 4, right? Now compare that to history, and we've got so many time periods, however broad or however specific, and I think CA are losing their touch on that. And I actually think with Troy they should have gone fantasy. I mean, it would have pissed off a lot of historical players, but I think they should have gone fantasy with Troy, just because there's not like this half in, half out.
Fair enough. We did cover that, so let's not
let's
too
go
far
back
away from Pixelated Apollo
ranting
and
about
like his departure from the series.
Yeah.
We definitely want to focus on
But
that.
do you think this is a flashpoint for more YouTubers leaving?
You know, I don't. Maybe not for the reasons that Pixelated Apollo. Not entirely. Okay, so this is a complicated subject. I think, and the thing that I find really interesting about his leaving is that I think it adds to a broader discourse of people being willing to question kind of older maxims, right? So previously you could justify a lot of things by saying, you know, they're a company, they need to make money. And I think that people are starting to maybe question that a little bit and project that particular narrative. So Pixelated Apollo brings up one of the things that he believes is important for a company that he is willing to support is that they are willing to put quality over a quick buck. And a lot of companies out there they try to balance that. I feel that that's a fair take. They try to balance that, you know, making money quickly and also putting out a decently quality product. But he doesn't think that they should prioritize money over an end product. He thinks that if you make a good product, people will come to you. And I think that's fair enough. And I think that is kind of is borne out somewhat by what we talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast with like Metacritic scores not really being able to accurately predict how much a title is going to sell. I think that that's a fair point based on that. But I also think that it's interesting because it adds to that discourse. And I don't want to go up on a pedestal here, and I'm not going to get political, but I think that it is a symptom of people being more willing to question older capitalist maxims of money for money's sake. And I think it's interesting for that reason.
Communist.
I know. I'm obviously a communist. I'm from Soviet Kazakhstan. I just watched 2 people immediately switch off the podcast as soon as they heard that. Oh man, I know how it is. It's fine.
What have you done?
I'm not even mad. No, I'm not even touching that, Dustin. Not even for a second. And I also think that it's interesting that he is willing to kind of take a financial hit. This is absolutely going to affect his bottom line. He's willing to take a financial hit for what he believes in. He's going to walk away from the series that made him famous in the first place, and that absolutely a lot of his base does kind of look to him to cover. And I think that that's important. I think that I think that people are willing to, and this is kind of like a different contrast, I guess, to what you're saying earlier, where CA is kind of taking a step away from their base in order to expand, you know, their share of the market and make some more money, et cetera. This is someone kind of going the opposite direction, where they're willing to take a hit and walk away from some of their base because of what they personally believe in. This is just, you know, them sticking to their guns and having conviction. And I think that it's, you know what? I don't really watch Pixelated Apollo stuff, and I don't really give a shit about Twitch. But I'm going to go and I'm going to buy a premium like Twitch subscription so I can support him in this, because I think that it's important that people stand up for the things that they believe in, and they got to be willing to take that hit. And I wish more people would do that.
Well,
so I think it's cool for those 2 reasons.
The thing I really like about Pixelated Apollo is he's principled. Like, he started a Let's Play of The Last of Us 2. And then when he realized about the DMCA takedowns, whatever, he just took the whole playthrough down, and he was like, "Sorry, I can't support this."
Totally, and you don't have to agree with everything.
I really admire that he's sticking to his like opinions or whatever.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that. And there were things that I found about his like take on Total War that I didn't personally agree with. For example, he thinks that you should get Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 as like part of the base game. And I think we're getting to the point where there's so much DLC that's necessary to bundle, but I don't agree with that necessarily. Those are 2 separate games. You want that content, you purchase those games. Fine.
Well, I agree with
is
him that Warhammer 2 is basically a glorified expansion.
right, but
I mean,
we don't have to like agree with everything he says basically in order to be like this guy he's doing something ultimately that I think is right and believes in. Right, exactly. He's principled. Support people that you believe in. We talked about this earlier with like, finding critics and stuff like that you trust and whose take you find valuable. Support those people. Do it. Support indie devs. I said that earlier. Support people that create content that you feel is reliable, is worthwhile. So just for a second here, just to go back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, actually early access that you brought up, another company I would have no problem purchasing early access for because they are principled and because they have a good track record of being consumer focused, is CD Projekt Red.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I guess you'd say that. Yeah.
I love the Witcher games. I played through the DLC and I was like, I can't believe you only charged me like $10 for this. This is like 10 hours of like solid content, really, really good narrative. It was, don't use the word brilliant very often. Not nearly as much as you English people, but I think it was brilliant. I loved it, and I would absolutely support them in whatever they want to do moving forward until they give me a reason not to. Yeah. And I think that we should do that for Pixelated Apollo as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. I think CD Projekt Red are the one company that I can think of that hasn't gone bad. Yeah.
And their digital marketplace, GOG, too. They have some cool policies. Like there was, I don't know if they're still doing this.
No Denuvo, right? I think that's one.
I'm not 100% sure about every like detail of GOG, but I know for a while they were doing like sort of this policy where you pay devs what you think this title is worth. And I think that was it. And they're also willing to like let you return a game after a ridiculous amount of time. They're just basically relying on the honor system of players. And some people are going to take advantage of that. There are shitty people everywhere, but that's just an example of like them being willing to kind of take a chance on their principles and things that they believe in. So like, hell yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hi, Neon Servers. How's it going, bud? But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to add to the Pixelated Apollo thing? I do have another topic we can talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it to me it shows that there is at least a slight fracture in the Total War community, and honestly, I think it did start with the release of Warhammer 1 because CA can't balance their priorities with historical and fantasy games, which is a shame.
I think you're right. I think there is definitely a rift in the community, and there's definitely overlap. Not everybody falls into one category or the other.
Oh, obviously. Yeah.
There are people who appreciate both, and I play Warhammer. I like Warhammer. Gambling doesn't. There's a microcosm of that at work. But yeah, I do agree that there's definitely a rift in the community, and there are people who want to see specifically historical titles and people who don't. And I think maybe you will see other people walk away from that. I don't think you'll. I don't know. Well, we'll see. Pixelated Apollo walked away from it for like very specific reasons, not just the direction of the series, but also some like moral qualms he had basically with.
I just think if CA aren't careful, like there's nothing really. I don't think there's anything stopping a really passionate historical player who's also a game designer, because game designers play games too, and all that, from doing their own take on Total War, just like the guy who made Darth Mod and then Ultimate General did.
And if you're an indie dev and you're out there, gambling will absolutely pay into your Kickstarter. That's what you're saying. You won't put your money where your mouth is. Oh,
I'll make you a trailer for your game.
What are we even doing here? Oh, there you go. That's something. Support them. But yeah, so I think that we've kind of talked about this a few times. So I think we've probably said everything that we're going to say about it. There is one other thing that I wanted to talk about today, and this is more of just like sort of for your information. This is pretty recent news, so I only just saw coverage of this today. But this is going to deal with Activision Blizzard and trying to blacklist a Hearthstone player because one of their former employees is married to this person and they have been vocally critical about the company. So a little bit of context. Back in 2018, Blizzard axed about 800 jobs. This is after they had like one of their best like financial, I think it was quarterly, but it might have been for the entire year. One of their best like financial periods of like ever. They dragged in a ton of money, extra like revenue and stuff like that. They were just doing well financially. And this also is the same time when Bobby Kotick, who is their CEO, I believe, he gave himself a nice big old bonus to the tune of like $1 million, more than that. And then they axed 800 jobs. So obviously the optics of that, not great.
Yep.
So this player whose name is, just one sec here. So his wife's name, who used to work there, she used to work there as like a community manager, I believe. And her name is Janae McConan, I believe. But in any case, she was vocally critical about this company on Twitter. They had like posted, one of their community managers had posted, you know, want to come work for Blizzard, blah, blah, blah. And this was like like 2 months or so after they had like axed all these people. And she's like, are you for real? She swore on Twitter. She's like, are you fucking kidding me? And so this Hearthstone player ended up being told he couldn't attend an event because of this, because he was married to this lady. And the official explanation that he was given, and it's presumed that this goes back to the community manager, was that, you know, it's who you're married to. So that's a problem, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about ethics in gaming and like being able to be openly critical. This isn't just like a reviewer. This is just like some rando on Twitter who happens to be connected to Blizzard through like, you know, 3 degrees of separation. She used to work there, but now her husband is kind of feeling the wrath as a result of her criticism. I don't know. What do we think about that? This is still an ongoing story, and this is actually posted on Yang Ye's channel, which I recommend that you guys absolutely check out. Easy enough to find the guy. He's got over 1 million subscribers. He's a critic, and he covers a lot of stuff like this, so it's a really good source. Yeah, that's kind of a nightmare, isn't it? That's dystopian almost.
I mean, it really does remind me of. It might have been Hearthstone. I can't remember what it was. It could have been Magic the Gathering. But during the Hong Kong protest, we won't go into it, but during the thing going on in Hong Kong, one of the players was like, said, I support Hong Kong or something.
Yes, I remember that.
And then they got banned.
Blitz chat, I believe that was.
Yeah. And they got banned from, was it the tournament or was it permanently or something? I don't know, but which, you know, like it's, if they're not careful, they're going to go in a really dystopian direction where they just ban anyone whose opinion they disagree with.
Yeah, I actually looked at this topic a lot back when it was still current, but it's not necessarily fresh in my mind. From what I recall, he was banned for a period of 6 months, and they also took away his prize money. Later on, they reneged on this a little bit, and they gave him his prize money, and there was an official like kind of apology, but a lot of people looked at it as like almost a non-apology, especially, you know, given that Blizzard upheld his ban following this apology. So yeah, that was kind of a nightmare. And I know that that Andrea in the chat there is like, she's got her kind of finger on the pulse of like things that go on at Blizzard and things like that in their games. So she might be able to give us a little bit of insight into that. But yeah, I do remember that, and it was a debacle for sure.
I mean, all I'll say is I agree with Clever Merchant when he says we must be aware of Chinese interference in Western media. I think the market in general, right? And this is only going to be for a second. We're not going to get political, but the thing that's happening recently with the big controversies of the police and all that, all these companies are putting out statements, right? You know, saying, you know, this matters, etc. Right? Whereas they didn't do that with Hong Kong.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Do you remember when last time we covered Warcraft Reforged a little bit, when we were talking about remakes and stuff like that, and I kind of broke down, you know, I give you like a timeline basically of a lot of controversies for there. There's one thing that I noticed in a video that someone actually pointed out was that, and this is sort of related to what you were saying, is that you couldn't make a game lobby that said Taiwan #1, but you could make one that said China #1. And I mean, I don't know the details behind that, but that did stand out to me as being like kind of, what? Are you serious? That's pretty crazy. But I mean, who knows? Who knows what the ultimate reason behind that was, and whether or not that's indicative of something sinister going on, whether or not there's influence, yada yada yada. It's all speculation. I want to make that very clear.
Well, it's like with the Chinese market, they have to like vet the games, don't they, to make sure they meet up with the standards of China, basically. Like a lot of people say with speculation, but a lot of people say with Three Kingdoms, they vetted that, and that's why it was delayed. When they said
that's
they
possible.
need more time or whatever.
It's well known that that's a thing that they are concerned about. There are like, I'm not trying to come out in favor of either side here. But I did play World of Warcraft for a while, and there was like certain things that they do try to vet, like bones. You can't show bones in game, and I think when you resurrect as a World of Warcraft character in like the Western and like European versions, there'd be like a skeleton there that would be left where your body used to be, and that would eventually disappear after a while. My understanding is that they can't actually show that, so they would have something else. The undead characters, they have like their joints would have like exposed bone. Again, they changed that so that wasn't there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of it, because there are like cultural norms as well that you kind of have to respect when you work there. But I'm sure there's other things as well.
I mean, to be fair,
what they changed exactly.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, things like that just feed into the general like culture in the West. Even, I mean, think about Total War and the Blood Pack DLC, right? That if they have blood in the game, they say that it has to be, 18 plus, and they miss out on a consumer.
I actually
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. No, go for it.
Well, I just find it weird, because there doesn't need to be blood for someone to understand there's killing, and I don't think the blood packs even make it all that gory. It just looks like red splats, doesn't it? Really? I mean,
the Three Kingdoms blood pack is personally kind of hideous. It just looks
I don't know about that.
It was like a Carrie moment, right? Like they just jumped into a pool full of like red corn syrup, and they're just like, blah, I'm dead.
But I just find it weird that people are still dying on screen, getting shot by arrows and stuff. Like, why does it matter whether there's like a red texture in that or not?
Right. There's certainly something to be said there about like sort of cultural views on violence and like what we're willing to accept and what we're not. And there's definitely a little bit of hypocrisy there. But as specifically, since we brought up blood packs, I know we're just kind of going off a tangent on honestly. We're at the end of the episode, so we're just talking about whatever we want to. But I ended up having a discussion with somebody on Reddit about the nature of like ESRB ratings and stuff like that, and how they work in different countries. So ESRB specifically, it's really weird, this workaround. So when CA says we can't include it as part of the base game, otherwise it will increase the rating, they're not lying to you. That's the takeaway here. They're not lying to you about it, but they don't necessarily have to charge you money. And I have seen people from CA. I couldn't find the quote of this for the life of me, but I swear to God, I have seen this on multiple occasions, and players echo this as well. You can't make the blood pack free because it would increase the rating automatically, even if it's included as DLC and not part of the base game. That is not true, at least not as far as the ESRB is concerned. What they really worry about is whether or not it's bundled. For one, if it's bundled, then it will increase the ESRB rating of that bundle. Mm-hmm. If it's part of the base game, then it will increase the ESRB rating. If it's free optional DLC, it doesn't matter. If it's something you can just opt into like on your own, then it won't increase the rating. So yes, they could totally offer it for free. The official explanation now that I read from following a Grace on the Total War Reddit, and she's a CA representative, is that it costs them money to make, therefore you pay for it. But if they wanted to offer it for free, absolutely they could. There's nothing stopping them, at least not as far as the ESRB are concerned. I don't know as much about PEGI. I only really looked at the ESRB for the purposes of that.
I mean, I think this is obviously we're talking about random stuff now because it's the end of the episode, but I think the problem with ESRB is how the ratings haven't changed with the culture. Like, I'm not being funny, but when I was like 16, 17 years old, like I played a ton of games with like gore and stuff, I
played Doom when I was a kid. I'm like, I got away with that.
So I think they need to adjust it so blood can be seen if they're like 16 or older, because I think I think the culture's shifted. Back in the 80s, obviously I'd understand it because it's like, the culture was different back then,
Mm-hmm.
But I think the culture's shifted to where 16, 17-year-olds, they're not necessarily more mature. So in some cases they're less, but like they're a lot more used to seeing gore in their media.
That would be, you know what? I would totally read a paper on shifting cultural perceptions of violence over, say, a period of 50 years. I would love to read that paper. So if we have any like social or like sociology students out there and you're looking for a thesis, please do it. I don't know. I will pay you. I will give you a hug or something, whatever you want, man.
Maybe we'll do that as a topic in the future. We'll do a video version of it.
That is also an interesting topic we could get into.
Topic, yeah.
But yeah, so we've actually gone a little bit over time here by nearly half an hour, which is impressive. Good job. Or no, almost. Yeah, probably about that. We usually run for about 90 or so minutes, so we're approaching 20 minutes over time. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode so far. I want to reiterate that all the stuff you hear in here, it's our opinion, unless I very specifically mentioned something as being a quote. I did have some quotes that we talked about when I was doing like interviews with Legend and Indie Pride and stuff like that. Yeah. So unless it's like specifically said to be otherwise, it's our opinion. Don't sue us. We don't want that. We don't have any money to take anyway. What do you want? Like I got a nice mug here. It's like an M&M mug. You can have that if you want, if you feel slighted, but
yeah. We'll just give you like you can sue me for like my rubbish or something, but that's basically all I own.
Yeah, pretty well. Gambling's a student, and I am also going back to school, so I'm technically a student too. So we're not worth suing. Just saying. We also do need a name for our podcast. So, like I said, as long as it's not overtly offensive and racist, then we're willing to consider it as a name. Archimedes thanks you, Dustin. Thank you very much. He's actually having a nap over at the end of my bed. Yeah, if
we should get a cat cam.
A cat cam
for the podcast.
I have a GoPro. I could link that feed.
Oh, do it.
And you can just like, watch him wander around. It'll be a lot of him just like not moving because he sleeps. So he sleeps like 16 hours a day. So that's probably what that will consist of. But whatever makes you happy. But yeah, so if you guys have suggestions for the name for the podcast, totally open to it. If you guys are 2D artists out there and you want to like make us a logo or something, I'm happy to it. I would happily negotiate, what you feel to be a fair price for your time and your effort. So you don't have to do it just out of the kindness of your own heart. But yeah, in any case, my name is Jordan. My charming friend here is Gambling. I hope you guys have enjoyed the podcast so far, and I hope you'll join us for maybe next week. I'm gonna start development on Silmarillion again, like hardcore next week. So I don't know.
It depends how passionate you get about the topic.
Yeah, if we find a topic and I just need to cover it, then I'll talk to Gambling about it and we'll figure out something for.
It'll be next week or the week after, basically.
Yeah, it'll be 2 weeks from now if we do have another episode, and I'll keep people appraised of that. But do know that I have lots going on. I have work. I have Silmarillion. Gambling has his own things. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this and hope you join us next time. Take care, everyone.
Take care.